Get started here. The last thing that we learned is that if you sick someone else's dog on or someone else's dangerous pet on somebody else, you're going to be patur midinei adam v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim. Since it's not your property, you can't be held liable, and therefore you'll only be liable in the eyes of heaven by creating causative damage. And that's a general rule in the laws of Nezikin and the laws of damages, is that there are many instances where justice is not served in this world because of the technical reasons. But Hashem says the great equalization for justice doesn't always happen in this world. So there will be justice, but in heaven. So a person should feel the even though halachically I may be off the hook, but I feel not only the moral obligation, but the spiritual obligation to make someone whole if I've caused them damage in that way. Okay, so let's go on to the next case. Mi shahaya mahalich birshus harabim ve'alav kol minei kelim shavirim. A person is walking in a public area and he's carrying with him, let's say in his knapsack or his bag, shopping bags, a whole bunch of breakable items. So he stops to rest and puts them down for a minute. A person comes and trips over his bags, ends up breaking the bag, breaking the breakable items. So is he obligated to pay for the damage that he caused? Oshuhu patur heyotu bal hakelim hayat sarich lahashkiach al kelav hetev. Or do we say that he's patur, the guy who broke the items, on the grounds that the owner of the utensils should have been more mindful to take care of his property and not leave it in a public area where people could trip? Kol sheyodea sheb'makom hazeh ovrim b'shavim harbe b'nei adam michashash shema yitkalu b'kelav, because he knows that a lot of people pass through here, and not everyone is going to be careful to watch where they're going. Okay, so secular law, I'm sure, Marv, there would be cases where there's negligence on behalf of the owner of the utensil by putting something down in a public area. So we know that, but in Jewish law, we know that we talk about sources of damage as causing damage. So let's say a guy trips over my item that I put in the public area and he breaks a bone. So in that case, it's clear from the Gemara, from the Mishnah, that's called a bor birishus harabim, leaving a source of damage in an open area. And therefore, the person who places that item down is going to be liable. Here, it's the opposite. It's not that the person who tripped got injured, but rather the person tripped and ended up breaking the utensils that I had placed down because I needed a moment to just rest. Okay, so the answer is as follows. Person puts down items in a public thoroughfare, and they're breakable, like earthenware or glassware. Anyone who trips over them and breaks them is going to be patur. Because people are not expected to pay attention while they're walking through a public area. And therefore, the person who breaks those items is considered not to be doing anything negligent, but rather it's completely by accident. And therefore, if the walker is injured in the course of tripping over them, the owner of the utensils will be liable. Oh, this is exactly what I was saying. is because it's like he dug a pit in a public area, shechayev bein hifkira uvein lo hifkira, that you're going to be chayev regardless of whether you have declared the utensils hefker or not. In other words, it makes no difference whether you still maintain ownership of those utensils or not. The fact that you merely put them down in a public thoroughfare where people could get injured makes you liable. The hefker eino moil. Hey, welcome back, Mordechai. The hefker eino moil kaven shaker hanachaso haita beisur. And making something hefker and say, oh, it's not mine anymore, that doesn't help, because just by having put them down in a prohibited way makes you liable. So you can't just say, well, after I took these utensils and I put them down in the public area, I forsook them and I made them ownerless. I have nothing to do with them anymore. You can't get off with that kind of argument.
In secular law, we have this concept of contributory fault or contributory negligence. So the guy who made the bore or placed the bag on other thing could be liable, but the walker could also be liable for responsible for his own injuries by being, let's say, distracted on the phone. He didn't see the hole or whatever it is.
Yes.
So he could also be liable, and the court has the discretion to assign the degrees of fault.
Right, like 80-20, 70-30.
For the guy, and the guy who put it there is not liable.
Right.
How do you prove that without a witness?
We have to tell your story, and then the judge would have to believe one or the other in the absence of witnesses. But witness could say the guy's texting or whatever, he fell right in the hole, right? So maybe he's liable himself, 100%.
It is a very common thing today for people to be walking without paying attention to where they're going.
People cross the street like that, look at their phone, big problem.
Yeah, it's really.
Both the driver and the walker, both of them.
Yeah, it could be 50-50, 60-40.
Maybe they're talking to each other.
Yeah, I don't recall whether there's this discussion of contributory damage in the poskim. There is something in the Shulchan Aruch which talks about that, a similar idea where there was permission for a person to put down the item. He quotes from the second seif in Shulchan Aruch, Hiniach hakad b'makom sheyesh lo reshus lahanicho. What if you put down the utensil, let's say the glass or earthenware utensil, in a place where you have permission to put it down? Kamo b'makom panui shelifnei beit habad. Let's say you're at an olive press. Okay. Now, what is an olive press? It's not a public thoroughfare, even though a lot of people come there. It's a business. You come to a business where people typically put down their utensils in front of the merchant who's selling his services. People bring big sacks of olives. They bring it to the olive press, because most people don't own their own olive press. And they bring it to the olive presser and they say, here, I'd like you to press my olives. And the guy says, okay, leave your stuff here and I'll come back. And you can come back in a few hours and I'll have this all pressed into your containers. So if the farmer leaves his olives and he leaves his containers, and that's how they do business. So in that kind of situation, a person has permission to put down his stuff. If someone were to walk along and trip and then break some of the glass utensils that I had left for him to pour the oil into, so then that person would be liable. Why? Because I had permission to put these items down. And when a person comes to an olive press, he's got to anticipate that there's going to be packages there. V'imhuzak bo hamahalech bal hakad patur. And if the person trips over my sacks of olives and injures himself, then I, as the owner of the olives, am going to be putter because mipnei shahaya lo lihistakel. Because there you should have been looking. Vimhaita ba'afela o shemole haderech kadim putter al shavirasa. If it was dark, however, or the whole area was filled with utensils and there's no place for the guy to walk, then then a person would be putter if he ends up breaking them, because even when you because the owner of an olive press has to create a walkway for the people to be able to get around the olive press. So there will be situations that if I end up breaking something, because simply there was no room for me to walk and I just tripped, so then I'm going to be putter for breaking them even at an olive press. And if I trip and get injured, so then the owner of the bags that blocked the entire way will be liable. It seems from the Shulchan Aruch that it's almost binary. In other words, who's chayev? If a person had no right to put them down there because this was an area for pedestrians, so then the owner of the utensils has the disadvantage. And if the person had a right to put his utensils down there, so then the person who breaks and trips has the disadvantage. But it doesn't talk about contributory, whereas you divide them, at least not at this point in halacha. Now, then the Shulchan Aruch continues, and he says, "Ve'imole kol haderech kadim she'efshel la'avor afilu shibro biyadayim patur." Now, if the whole area to gain access to the olive press is filled with containers, then even if a person just tries to push his way through physically and forcefully pushes away some of the items and then breaks them, even then he's going to be putter. Umihu in bishasha shibraim huzak b'charse putter. But if when pushing the utensils aside, he injures himself on a shard, let's say, then the owner of the utensils is going to be putter. Afal pi shamoli kol haderech de'ihu da'azik anafshe. Even if the whole area was cluttered with these utensils. Why? Because the person who pushed these items aside did so knowingly, and he actually injured himself. No, it's not because of my utensils. So there are going to be different situations where both parties will be at the disadvantage or have the advantage. In other words, let's say I come and drop off my utensils at the olive press, but it's such a big order that I end up leaving all of my stuff where there's no place to walk. And in order for this person to conduct his business, he's got to have a place to get through. So I told you to leave your stuff in the side. I never told you to leave it in the middle of everything. And so therefore, you had no permission to do that. And as a result, if I break some of your stuff, I'm going to be putter. But if in the course of pushing your stuff aside, I injure myself, so then then the owner of the utensils is going to be putter also.
That's contributory fault.
It's
Issue the risk from.
That's right. That's true. Although we haven't yet found in halacha where the contributory damage ends up making it such that a person only pays partial payment. Right. Now, Ba'ayin ba'aruch hashulchan shapirish bekavanas hashulchan. So the Aruch hashulchan explains, she'imole kol haderech ad she'efshar la'avor, afilu shibru biyadayim potter. That if a person fills the area up to the point where it's impossible to get past without pushing some things aside, then even if he ends up breaking them proactively, he's going to be putter. V'im yesh makom lavor b'doichak im shibrim biyadayim chayv. But if there is a way to walk past the clutter without having to push anything, so then you're going to be chayv if you end up breaking something. V'im niskal v'shibrim putter. And if you end up breaking stuff when you push them aside, you're going to be patur. She'eno tzarich litroach u'lihisponin v'leilech b'makom doichak she's chayiv al yedei kishlono b'hem yu'uyin sham. So he gives like a middle of the road situation. If there's a little room for me to get through, but I don't want to, but I'm annoyed that I have to maneuver through these utensils, so I push them aside, and then by pushing them, I break some of the utensils, so I'm going to be chayiv. But if I try to maneuver, and then I end up tripping, and stuff breaks, I'm going to be putter in that situation. So there's all different levels of damage, but we haven't yet seen, and he doesn't end up sharing this possibility, that there should be a sharing of the damages. Okay, let us.
So it's obvious when people park their cars where they should not be parking. You've got to squeeze to get through the scratches car. You be liable to pay for it.
It's a really good question. I think that because you're in an area where you could see, like you have an obnoxious guy who takes up 2 spots. He parks over the line.
At the door in the front. Yeah. It really happens at the Chabad Plaza, especially.
Yeah, there's a lot of obnoxious people who can't be bothered to walk out of their cars because they're more important than everyone else there. And that's, that's an attitude that we as Jews sometimes have trouble with, is that my affairs have to take priority over everyone else's affairs. And it's a little bit hard to understand sometimes the way people's minds work. But the fact that I can see very clearly where they are, I don't think that exempts me just because they're in a public area. It is a public area, but the whole reason why a person who breaks things as a pedestrian is putter is because he's not expected to watch where he's going. But when you're in a car, you're expected to watch where you're going at all times. So I don't think that you can make that argument, well, I thought I had enough space and I ended up scratching his car, but he was obnoxious where he put his car. So that's a mitigating factor. I don't think that becomes a mitigating factor.
Well, the other one, if you could scratch your car trying to pass by and the guy is parking in a prohibited place.
I don't think that would make a difference because I don't think he's going to be liable.
Yeah, but he's parking in a legal.
But you have an option not to do that.
Yeah, I
No
can.
way out. That's it. That he's blocking the way out. So you need to.
So yeah, he's blocking. So you have to honk your horn, run into the store. You have to do whatever you can to get him to move his obnoxious car with his obnoxious personality. But yeah. So it can be frustrating to live in a Jewish community sometimes when you're in the parking lot. You find people that will take 2 parking spots, and then you discover, well, it's the 85-year-old Bubby who shouldn't be driving anymore. Yeah, she shouldn't be driving anymore. And so, all right, so then you have some Rahmanis, right? Okay, now, all right, so let us go on to the next halacha. Okay, she'ela, mahatam shemisha mazik mamon chavero o mishalem es hanezek miskaperlo ve'enu tzarich levakesh mimenu sheimchalo. Why is it that if I go ahead and I damage your property, then I think the word is mishalem es hanezek miskaperlo, that once I pay you for the damage, I'm done. And I don't have to ask you for mechila. There's no such halacha that your Hashem's not going to forgive you until you get mechila from the damagee. Ma she'en kein hachovel b'chavero afal pi shenasam al chamisha dvarim nezek tzar ripoy v'sheves uboshes eno miskaper lo ela im kein mevakesh mehanechbal mechila. He says, which is unique, because in other forms of damage, let's say I injure you physically. meaning there's a distinction between whether I've caused damage to your property or whether I caused damage to your person. When I cause damage to your property, the halacha is I pay you and I'm done. I don't need your mechila. I don't care how upset you are. I'm done. I've paid you. Whereas when I accidentally break your arm, okay, then I have to ask you mechila, even though I've paid, let's say, even more for the damages, because I don't have to just pay for the medical services that you receive. I have to pay for your time off from work. I have to pay for your pain and suffering. I have to pay, there's a lot of extra things that I have to pay for. Okay, so that's usually 5 things. Nezek is pain. Nezek is damage. Meaning, how do I in any way devalue you in the slave market? That's number 1. Tsar is pain and suffering. Ripoy is medical expenses. Sheves, time off from work. And finally, boshes is whatever humiliation that I caused you. That's the difference between, I guess, pain and suffering. Pain is the actual pain, and suffering is what other kinds of humiliating experiences that you have to undergo as a result of this injury. Okay, so eno miskaperlo, so I will not get mechila unless I ask you, unless you actually are moichel me. Why is that? V'chein hagazlan shegozal es chavero, and similarly, if I steal from you, afal pi she'eshe b'sagzela eno miskaperlo elim ken yiratzeu v'yimcholo, then I don't get mechila unless I ask you and you forgive me. So why is it that when I damage property, I don't have that same level of responsibility to get mechila from you? Now, where does this come from? He's going to show us the sources in just a minute. Just before we see the answer, I just want to remind you that tomorrow is a fast day. The fast doesn't start until around, was it 6:40? Something like that, or maybe a little bit earlier. But it'll start after we start shir. So you may just want to remind you in case you bring your coffee or tea to the shir, and also you may want to eat something before the fast starts, before you
You
leave.
have to have it in mind tonight, right?
As long as you have in mind, just even having it in mind now that I'm not accepting the
Right.
fast, is you don't have to specifically have in
I
mind
heard something about
that
it.
I'm-
School thing,
that I'm going to wake up to eat. No, as long as you didn't accept the fast before you go to bed. Yeah, as long as you have in mind that I may wake up.
I'm gonna eat. Unless you have otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, just by virtue of the fact that you're thinking about it now is sufficient. Okay, so the tshuva is hamazik mamon chavero kevin shemishalim hanezik miskaper lo ve'enu tzarich levakish b'menu mechila eli yisvada v'yasa tshuva. He says when it comes to damaging someone else's property, you don't need that other person's for forgiveness. All you have to do is ask Hashem for forgiveness for whatever part you may have played that you may have been negligent in some way. Okay, ve'eno doma lechovel b'chavero, and it's dissimilar from a case of where you injure a person physically. Why? The kaven shetziaro begufo eno miskaper lo eno miskaper lo elam ken yavakesh mechila min nachlo v'imchalo. When you injure someone's person, you have to get their mechila. V'chein hagazlan kaven shenena min ha'avera av she'esha v'zagzil miskaper lo elam ken yiratzes chaveru v'yavakesh mechila v'imchalo. So he just basically answers the question by making a statement that was implicit in the question. So this is again, one of the problems we have with the Sefer is that sometimes he writes things that seem to be a little bit hard to understand. So it's riddled with some typos and also sometimes this kind of question. Yeah, that's the fact. You're not going to get mechila until when it comes to personal damage and to theft, unless the guy is moichel you. That's the only way that you're going to get kapara. Now, why is it? So let's take a look at the footnote. So first he quotes the Rambam, and the reason why when you injure a person physically, that you need to get mechila from him is machmat hakalon sha'asalo, because of the harm that you caused him. Shenamar ve'ata hashev esha sa'ish kinavuhu v'yispalel ba'atcha v'chyeh. Now, where do we know this from? We know this from the story of Avraham, because the story was that Avimelech took Sarah to be his wife, and then God comes to Avimelech in a dream at night and says, "You're going to die because you've taken a married woman, someone else's wife." And Avimelech says, "I didn't know, I didn't realize. Okay, I won't touch her." So then Hashem tells Avimelech, "You must pray. You must return Sarah to her husband, and he will pray for you so that you will live." Meaning that there's no guarantee that you're going to get forgiveness unless Avraham proactively intervenes on your behalf. Shaharei roim shelo nimcha lavimelech ad shebikesh me Avraham sheimcha lo v'yispalol ba'ado. What you see from that pasuk is that when you harm someone on a deep emotional level, which is either causing them bodily harm, which causes an emotional pain, or when you cause someone damage in some other way where they're emotionally pained by that damage, then it's not enough just to pay for the damage. And that seems to be the distinction between property damage and personal damage. When it comes to property damage, you know what? You can live without your car for a week. And if the guy damages your car, a normal person should not be so emotionally attached to their property that they're so personally upset about it. Now, of course, there are cases like that. Person just buys a new Maserati and just takes it out of the showroom, and as soon as he gets it into the street, he gets into an accident. You can certainly understand the emotional pain, but as a general rule, that's the distinction in halacha. The distinction is with property, you're not emotionally as invested, and therefore, as long as the damager pays for it, we're done. When it comes to personal damage, personal injury, when it comes to what was the other case? When it comes to stealing, where a person feels that their rights and their privacy were violated, there's emotional capital involved, and therefore you have to get their mechila. Okay, does that make sense? Uvi Gemara Sham Muva Bebraisa. The Gemara brings a brisa called Elu Shamru Demei Boshto. Avol Tziaro Afilu Hevi Kol Ayole Nevayos Shebaolam Eno Nimchal Ad Sheyevakesh Mimenu Shenemar Hashev Eshes Haish. So it's the brisa says it's all derived from this idea of that if you cause someone pain, then they're emotionally invested. If you cause them humiliation, they're emotionally invested. So even though you've paid them, you've compensated them for a value of their humiliation and suffering, you still have to get their mechila. Upiresh Rashi Sham, Avol Tsar Shedoig Al Boshto Enu Nimchalo. The pain that you get when a person is from being humiliated, that will not be forgiven just by paying someone off. V'chein pasuk harambam bichlas chavel umazik eno do v'mazik chavero beguf l'mazik mamona shehamazik mamon chavero kemin sheshilei mashu chayv l'shalim niskaper lo avol chavel b'chavero afal pishanasam l'chamish d'varim ein niskaper lo afilu hikriv kol ayole nevayos ein niskaper lo v'lonim chalavon hashivigash min anechval v'yim chalo. He uses the exact same language. Now, and in Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam writes, he quotes a different pasuk to bring that point. That he says, Mikol chatos adam, that you have to do tshuva from any offense that you commit against a human being. And that's getting mechila from the person whom you offended. All right, so we'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day, and Mitzvah Hashem. We'll see you tomorrow, even though it's a fast day.